So it's my honor to introduce the first speaker this afternoon, which is Professor Dan Stowell from Tilburg University and the Naturalis Biodiversity Center, so both in the Netherlands. So, and the topic will be on AI for wildlife sounds. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So yes, I think the scheduling is quite nice here because I am going to shade from technology through to impact, and that's what I like to do. So I will be talking about birdsong, and I'm very pleased that we've already had birdsong come up in the conversation already at this symposium, so that's very nice. But especially since you've just had your lunch, I thought I should bring you some calming birdsong from the Netherlands. But before we just play a short sound excerpt, I'd like you to think this will be about 20 seconds, and you can either relax, and that's fine, or you can try and identify how many species are present in the sound recording. Would anyone like to guess? We've got 5, we've got 6, 2, 4, 3. Okay, this is, it's really nice to do this. Okay, maybe you're not embedded in the soundscape right now, so it's a difficult task. But still, one of the things I like about the work that I do is that, frankly, birdsong soundscapes are absolutely fascinating. Even just looking at this spectrogram, right? It's beautiful, right? It's a beautiful spectrogram. And in there, part of the reason that it's beautiful, I would say, is there is a lot of information. And of course, being able to identify different sound sources, that's part of the information. And many birds have evolved to make that job easy because they want to be identified. So here are the answers for you. We have the number of species. Okay, so this is the English names, of course, but we've got the wren and the goldcrest repeated, chaffinch as well. Lower down, we've got wood pigeon, sparrow, and blackbird. And then car, if you count that as a species. And this is a good example of the type of monitoring that I've been working on for quite a few years now in various different projects. This is information that is right there in the soundscape, and we can do things with it. And so in this talk, the main task that I will talk about is bird species classification, just like we just did. It's only one of the tasks that we try to do, because there are many other things we could try and extract from that soundscape. But it's very popular, partly because it's an ingredient in monitoring wildlife, of course. But it's very viable now. And what makes it work? Well, deep learning. You might have guessed that was part of the answer. Songbirds, as I've already said, they possess a very strong signature of species in the sound. There's a specific advantage that there's a large volunteer community that wants to identify birds and wants to record birds, and that makes a big difference to the viability of this project. And related to that is the availability of open data. And so you may or may not have heard of this website, Seno Canto. It is an open project that gathers birdsong submissions from all around the world. And even if you don't know it, it's the data source that powers every single birdsong recognition app you have used. How many people here have used a birdsong recognition app? Okay, we've got about, oh, this is good, about 60% of the audience, thank you. And so this is, all 4 parts of the recipe are important here. It's not just a question of deep learning solves everything. Here's my app. This one is called Warbler. And we've been running this actually for 10 years now. So this is just for the UK only. And so we published this 10 years ago, and it's still running. You can simply record a sound file, submit it, and then you get a prediction of what birds are there. And of course, this is a popular tool for people to use. But we also hope to be able to monitor wildlife using these kinds of things. So that was in the UK. I'm now based in the Netherlands, as you heard. Thank you for the introduction. I'm based in the Netherlands, and we have projects where we want to monitor all of the species that we can across the Netherlands. And in these projects, it's not just sound, it's also image, it's DNA, it's other things. And of course, it's not just the Netherlands. We want to monitor the whole of Europe. So a lot of the work that I'm involved in is European-funded projects where, well, in my part, we want to provide acoustic monitoring for every species that we can acoustically identify across Europe. It's a good time for this work, especially because institutions such as the European institutions are active in wanting to get this job done. And so it's very nice to be able to help with that. So my goal is possibly slightly different from a lot of the goals in the talks you'll hear here. My goal is to acoustically identify species and then use that for monitoring, as in biomonitoring, reporting how many species are present and how that changes. But the devil is in the details, and the devil is in the datasets. There are many datasets, and they are not despite the scale that we have, they are not as systematic as the kind of data that people can collect for speech recognition projects, for example. So we still have data limitations. And in our field, there is an inherent issue of unbalanced data. Oops, there we go. Anyway, second bullet point. Because, of course, there are rare species, there are species that don't make sound very often, it's inherently an unbalanced task, and so we have to deal with a lot of things. Of course, we have to deal with noisy background, we have to deal with time-varying conditions, because we're doing monitoring out in the wild. So these difficult conditions will be familiar in a lot of the work that you do, I'm sure. But we have to deal with them. So how are we going to do that? So for the technical part of this talk, I just want to say a little bit about how we make that progressively even easier using current methods in deep learning, and that is pre-trained networks. So we're going to use a neural net to recognize sounds, and it's actually very common these days that you can take a deep neural network that's been pre-trained for one task. The blue rectangles here represent layers in the deep neural network. So let's take most of those layers and then just use that, and we're going to now retrain it for some other tasks. So there is some pre-processing here already provided, and then we're going to use it for other tasks. This is pretty common, and it's fantastic in a lot of ways. So there are a couple of ways of doing it. The most common method is what we might call fine-tuning. So we take a deep neural network that we can download from somewhere. Maybe it's been trained on music, maybe it's been trained on general environmental sound, and then we can just do a bit more training. So with our database of wildlife sounds, we're just going to train it again. And what you see on the diagram here is actually the light-colored rectangle is the final layer. If we only train the final layer, we call that shallow fine-tuning. And so the idea is that the knowledge embodied in the main network is frozen. Let's imagine that that's knowledge about generic processing of audio. And then we just want to fine-tune the final part that outputs predictions about animals. An alternative to that is deep fine-tuning, where we retrain the whole thing. A slightly more recent alternative is, instead of taking the model and fine-tuning it, we're going to adapt a brand new model using a method called knowledge distillation. And so if I have my pre-trained model here, this can be a model that was trained for generic sounds, for recognizing all kinds of things in the world. And it could be a very big model. But maybe it's not ideal for my task in wildlife monitoring. I might want to choose a different model, this green one. I might want to choose a more modern model. I might want to choose a more efficient model. And this alternative to fine-tuning is that instead of tuning this first model, we now train the second model to produce the same predictions as the first model. And that's a different way of transferring well, we should call it knowledge in quote marks really, but we're transferring some knowledge from one model to another. A big advantage of this second approach is that it potentially allows us a lot more freedom in how we choose the model that we're going to use eventually. But then a potential downside is we're kind of retraining a whole model from scratch rather than just reusing something that we can simply download. So kind of open questions on which are the more appropriate strategies generally. Yeah, in fact, there are quite a few questions. So that's one of the questions. I'm going to talk about a different question, which is, should we use a pre-trained model that is trained on birds or on general audio? And I want to pull something out of that a little bit later. But various other questions we could ask about that. What type of deep learning should we use in developing these models? So I'm not going to go through all these questions, but I'll look at fine-tuning and knowledge distillation and talk about our recent results. So this is from our project to, the results you'll see on this slide are for detecting birdsong across Europe. And so this is we're training model that is designed for the whole of mainland Europe and to deploy that as a service. So what you see in the results here, we have 6 different alternatives, and in each case, you see in the third column, we're using knowledge distillation or fine-tuning. The first column, the model type, that includes some convolutional neural networks, it includes some transformers. But I also want to focus on the pre-training source. So BirdNet means it's pre-trained on birds. AudioSet means it's trained on generic audio, which originally comes from YouTube. So just miscellaneous, human-centric audio. And if you want to know the scores, they're over here, which broadly indicates that the top performing model was in fact BirdNet with knowledge distillation, which means that a bird-specific pre-trained model, maybe that makes sense, and using the knowledge distillation method was the most effective way of getting good performance. And also this model, PASST, so that's a transformer-based method. So if you're looking simply for the top score, then that's what we get. But now if you look at these violin plots down below, so that's the same data but now shown as a violin plot where we see the shape of the violin represents the distribution of performance per species. So we've got in total about 600 species, and there is a lot of variation within the species on the results. And you can see that a lot of these models are actually quite similarly performing given the distribution of quality. So instead of looking merely at the raw performance, we might also look at the efficiency of the method. In these results, we can look at the time taken to train the system. One of the things that we thought going into this would be that knowledge distillation would be a much more inefficient way to train a model because we have to run 2 models, train them in parallel, etc. In the right-hand column there, you'll see actually that the main factor in the time taken to train is not whether we use distillation or fine-tuning, but it's just the choice of model that we want to train in the first place. So that top-performing PASST actually takes a long time to train just inherently. And our choice of knowledge distillation, in fact, is not a major factor there. So that's good news. Because I like knowledge distillation. I think it gives us a lot more flexibility to not be trapped in neural networks of the past. We're digging into these ideas a little bit more at the moment. So Vincent Carter, who's just doing his PhD with us on the bioacoustic AI project, he's focusing on the rare sounds, the infrequent or even unknown sounds. And that question is very important in acoustic monitoring because, of course, the rare sounds or the rarely occurring sounds are often of interest in conservation. And they're very rarely summarized in these headline statistics where we just tell you how well we perform on average. So we've just released these results which have just been accepted to Forum Acousticum, which is nice. So I hope you'll be able to hear more about that pretty soon. what I'm showing you on the screen here is a figure from that in which we are analysing the way that different pre-trained models represent the data from birdsong. And in order to get at the rare sounds, we want to focus on how well the sounds are separated. So it's not just whether we can classify, but something about how well the space is organised. So the space here, these are UMAP projections, and that's how we're doing this fairly standard method. This contains some surprises. So there are actually, we've got 15 plots here, and they're organised from top to bottom according to the silhouette score, which simply gives us a first impression of how well they cluster the data. And what's surprising is that some of the most recent, most innovative models are not up at the top, but in fact, the very standard pre-trained models, this perch bird and this bird net, these are two of the most common generic birdsong recognition models. They are convolutional neural networks. They've been around for a while, and they're performing most strongly in this analysis. But I guess this is kind of a preliminary analysis, and we want to dig into these results a little bit more. And now maybe we can get onto the impact. So let's deploy it. Another project that I'm involved in, this is led from Norway, a project called TabMon, and we want to do bird acoustic monitoring across a very large scale. The reason I've included this project figure here is so that you can see the scale. We're going from the top of Norway through to the bottom of Spain, and we have a network of acoustic sensors which are monitoring in specific locations and sending the sound in this case. This morning we talked about whether you should transmit the sound or whether you should transmit spectrograms, etc. I think that's a really interesting discussion, and yeah, I think we need to develop that. In this project, we're recording the sound directly. So we're taking the sound, and that is transmitted back to base through 4G networks. And then we want to, in real time, analyze that. It's very large scale, especially given that the system needs to be tuned and calibrated for the deployments. And at this scale, we have a very low number of possible annotations of the data. So much less than 0.1% of the data could ever be annotated according to our project constraints. But one of the things that we can do, and this is the work of postdoc Ben McEwen, who's working with me, is to use a human-in-the-loop fine-tuning process to make this, to make the optimal use of extremely limited annotated time. A second one, I can finally say something urban, which is we do some urban bioacoustic monitoring as well. And so this is a project in the UK collaborating with Heijmans, which is a construction company. I said a UK, in the Netherlands, a construction company in the Netherlands. And we're monitoring, just as a pilot, on a housing construction site in Rotterdam, a continuous acoustic monitoring before construction, during construction, and after construction of the housing estate. And you can imagine that the soundscape before, during, and after construction, these are three very different soundscapes in general. Yeah, so the second sound file I have for you, you don't need to count anything here. This is just to give an impression of the type of soundscapes we're dealing with. I'll come back to the spectrogram in a second. But you'll hear a little bit of birdsong and then some construction noise. Thank you. The spectrogram of that is here. So we have the birdsong at the top there, and then the banging comes in. And I think it's really salient for me that the bird continues through. This is extremely loud sound. This is a pile driver. And this is just one example, but it's very clear that even in a very urbanized area in the middle of a construction site, there are many wildlife activities that carry on through, and these attempts at communication carry on through. And this is one of the things that we want to monitor in this project and understand. So on the technical side of that, it gets difficult because most of the systems that do automatic recognition of animal sound aren't really trained on the kind of sound that you just heard. And that means that they might not be very good at representing it. So here is, again, a UMAP embedding of the sounds such as the one you just heard. Each dot is 1 minute. And here I have, what do I have? Oh, it doesn't say how many months. I think it's about 3 months of audio. And the coloring there is by time of day. So midnight is red, and then you go through to the middle of the day in green-blue. So you can see, of course, that there's a diurnal cycle, which has a general stable characteristic over the 3 months. But you can also see that there are some interesting clusters here. And you might say, oh, what is this cluster over here? What is this cluster over here? That's the kind of thing that, that we want Vincent to analyze in his PhD project. But you can also see that there's a very big blob of varying stuff. And I think that remains a challenge for these kind of representations. We need to develop representations that are, it's not about being robust to that noise, but about being able to represent that noise more semantically. And I think it still is possible to represent both the bird and the construction noise simultaneously. The final project that I want to tell you about that's related to this is speech detection. Again, it's very nice. This was mentioned before lunch. Voice activity detection, and not only for urban noise monitoring, but also for wildlife monitoring. We want to know if there are humans in our soundscape. And there are 2 reasons for this. Of course, privacy is one reason, but another one is to analyze the interaction between human activity and wildlife activity. So the work that I'm talking about here was originally presented by, Norwegian group in 2022 to run voice activity detection at very large scale. And voice activity detection as a concept has existed for a very long time, but it hasn't been done for ecological soundscapes in this way. So the systems that are trained for conference loudspeakers, they don't work in general wildlife soundscapes. So you just need to train one that is designed for that. And now we want to run that at a very large scale. So I'm coming back to this distillation concept because this group created a model that does voice activity detection, and we're going to want to run it across our large amount of data coming in real time from these monitoring projects. So we're going to need a small model. And in fact, the origin of this knowledge distillation idea was indeed to distill down to a small model. So this green model can be as small as you like, and I think well, we can get smaller, frankly. We found that this was actually quite straightforward because many models are not immediately optimized to be small and efficient. So in this work, which is published in MDPI Sensors, what you can see in the plot here, oops, I've somehow destroyed my presentation. Thank you. What you can see in the plot here, we've got flops, floating point operations on the x-axis. On the y-axis, we have the F1 score of classification, binary classification task, voice or no voice. And the original model, the teacher model, is in the bottom right over there, having a very large amount of floating point operations per decision. And the size of the circle, by the way, is the number of parameters in the model. So what we were able to do, this was Drew Preber's master's project, was he found that we can actually shrink the model substantially. And when you do this kind of thing, you want to shrink the model and preserve performance. But sometimes, as you see here, we can shrink the model and improve performance. So that's very nice. One of the reasons for this is, of course, that when you have a deep learning model that can be very large, in classical terms, we might say it was over-parameterized. There is still the possibility that that's what's going on, that the original authors basically in some sense, chose a model that was too big. And then what we're doing here is now retraining it with small, efficient models, and that adds more constraints to the problem. And in this case, not in every case, but in this case, it leads to improved performance. So, everything I've told you so far is about birdsong monitoring, and this is indeed what we're deploying as services across Europe. This includes large-scale streaming prediction, and it includes, it should eventually include voice activity detection and so on. But those are not the only species that you can hear. So insects, I think, are an important one to work on. Insects are incredibly important for our biodiversity and planetary health. And frankly, insects don't have as many fans as birds do, right? So it's important. I think we need to push on this. And the same job that we've been doing for birds over the past 10 years, we need to do the same thing for insects. So what we've done to stimulate that is to publish a new data set. So this has 459 species of insects from around the world. You can see from the map it's not entirely around the world, but it's what we can get from the kind of citizen science data collection that I've referred to at the beginning of the talk. And so that's a new data set which I hope people can do nice things with. If you want to classify insects, this is a really good starting point. Bats is ongoing work, but yes, of course, bats are of importance for various reasons. And so within the European projects that I've talked about, these are the focuses that we have: birds, insects, bats, and also anurans. Open science is really important. This is partly why I'm stressing these citizen science projects and the participatory side of it. So we want to share data to maximize reuse. We want to share algorithms to spread efficient practice. And on that basis, in that spirit, I want to announce that we are this year launching BioDCase as a challenge. If you've heard of the DCase challenges, that's detection and classification of acoustic scenes and environments. So the DCase challenges have been running for about 10 years plus now. And in Barcelona this autumn, we are adding a one-day satellite of DCase called BioDCase, where we want to stimulate the community to handle some of the kind of tasks that I've been talking about. So I hope that you have friends, students, colleagues who would like to join in this kind of thing. We have 3 tasks this year: multi-channel alignment, detecting whale calls, and bioacoustics for tiny hardware, relating to what I was just talking about tiny models. So I'm excited about this, and I really hope that we can build some community effort here. So my conclusion is join BioDCase. But more generally than that, acoustic monitoring is a great evidence stream for biodiversity. We've done it for birdsong, and we're on the verge of deploying it live at European scale. And I think a real benefit of modern machine learning is this optimal use of pre-trained models. I don't have to reinvent the whole thing from zero. It also improves our climate footprint to be able to use pre-trained models rather than to have to train everything from zero. There is more work needed on shrinking these things and making them run at scale with very small footprint. But the resources are here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for your talk. Perfectly in time. So are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, you will get the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I'm ignorant of this. I haven't used an app. I was just wondering, for well-known bird species and potentially whales as well, are you just doing species recognition, or are you also looking at the meaning of the song? What can you roughly translate? Are they stressed? Are they happy? Are they mating? Does it do that?
There are a few different layers to that. It's a really interesting topic, of course, and the main limitation on answering that is, indeed, the volume of labeled data. So, of course, it's quite easy to crowdsource a relatively large amount of species labeled data to label whether the animal is in distress or not. Okay, that's not going to be quite so easy to get large-scale reliable data. So that is done in relatively small projects, and that's perhaps analysed, you know, for a species-targeted project, typically. We can do it, and we can do it to some extent. The next step, the next more detailed step after the species, there are two things that can be quite commonly labelled by many people, which is the ID of the bird, meaning the individual ID, or the call type, whether it's an alarm call, when there's a cat, make an alarm call, or whether it's a song to sing, you know, the classical song that we know. And so these call types, they relate to function, and we can get people to label them. So the different call types, although the different call types don't tell you everything about the bird's experience, they are a pretty good route into a lot of that.
Okay, some more questions or comments from the audience?
Really interesting presentation. Thank you. Just it's not exactly a question actually. I think it would be really nice if at the beginning of the presentation you had some bullet points why what you're doing is really important. Because me, I'm not in acoustic ecology, and I had to ask ChatGPT, and it gave me some very nice 5 bullet points why this is really important, from climate tracking and everything, not only for biodiversity. So I think it's really good for the broad public to be better informed in that. Even though it seems like 60% of the people here, they use some of the tools that you're using, for me it was quite new. So it's really good. I think it's really important because, I mean, we see like research actually, research like what you do is being attacked nowadays, especially in the US. So I think it's really good to point out why what you're doing actually is really important.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Thank you. No, you're absolutely right that I didn't include that here, and I should have done. I do have other slides in which, so there are various things relating to the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis where it's actually surprisingly easy to connect what we do to the big large-scale issues. And I know there are some people I won't convince about that, but yeah, it really is. We're only contributing a small amount to the evidence here, right? Because acoustic evidence is just, I think acoustic evidence is one interesting, novel, and complementary evidence source against some of the more classical evidence sources like DNA monitoring and various other things. So even though it's not the entire solution, it really is an important, like, complementary stream to add. And I'm really grateful for that.
Okay, if I'm allowed, so we have a question online and then we come back to you, Trond. So a question from Cleo online. So I was wondering if Dan has also been looking at how animal species, for instance the birds in this example, react to man-made construction noise.
That's not something that I work on, so I'm afraid the answer is no for that. But what I was alluding to with the construction noise project, we haven't analysed that data in detail yet, but I am interested to understand to what extent do different types of animals continue in these high noise scenarios. It's pretty likely that there are some animals that decide not to continue vocalizing. Maybe they go and do something else. Maybe they have problems as a result, like an inability to forage or an inability to find mates. So there can be consequences, and actually continue whether they are vocalizing, and especially whether they are vocally interacting, is something that we'd like to know, and we haven't analysed that yet.
Thanks. Please, Trond.
Yes, I think that's a very important study and work because when it comes to planning, you often have the case that you have to do a research on a plot or a piece of land before and you develop it. So you have to, in a way, find out what species are there, if they're rare species. And the question is here, the insects plays a big role. So usually you have a biologist and try to collect or count the insects. What type of insects can you gather with this type of analysis.
So in the songbird example, most songbirds have a song that is complex enough and that is distinctive to the species, that most species can be recognized clearly. With insects, some insects have less distinct sounds, and part of the reason for that is that they haven't evolved to use sound as a species-specific identifier. That's part of the evolutionary process. The two species groups that work well for that reason are cicadas and grasshoppers and crickets. And they do have species-specific calls used as part of mating, and so that's how we get a good discriminability. There are lots of other insects, and you can think of bees, wasps, where there may be differences between species, but not necessarily. And so in some of those cases, we might be able to recognize it down to not the species, but the genus. And that gets us some information, but not all of the information. So certainly, for acoustic recognition, we can't do a good job across all insects. But for certain targeted species groups, yes. And now whether those are the species groups of conservation interest, well, that's a local matter, yeah.
Okay, who has the mic? Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Specifically about the urban bioacoustics project, I was wondering about these sound recordings. Did they come from fixed stations, permanent sound stations? Did you by any chance use audiomoths? And did you by any chance focused on the dawn chorus in these sound recordings?
No. For both of the projects that I've talked about, let's see. The Tabmon project, which is across Norway and not necessarily urban, and this project, which is just a pilot project in one urban location. In both cases, these are fixed recording devices, and I'm afraid they're not audiomoths. In this large project, it's it's a device that streams the audio back home, and that's a device called the Bug. In this project, we're using the Frontier Labs Bar LT recording device. Just practical choices. And for both of these projects, we're doing continuous 24/7 monitoring. So no, we're not in this case focusing on the dawn chorus. In the first project, one of the reasons for that is that we're not just focusing on dawn chorus behavior, but also trying to detect migrating birds. And so we don't know exactly what time of day is the perfect time for that, so we do continuous monitoring.
Okay, maybe a last question. Yes.
It was a remark regarding the question of Clio. So there are published evidence of adaptation of birds regarding to human presence, human noise. So that can be something that where the bird shift their sound presence during the day. They can also shift their frequency range. So that's from a colleague I know is Laurent Godet that really worked on this. Something that was really interesting with your spectrogram is that maybe, because this has been shown on the time scale, a macro time scale, but here the question will be, does the bird adapt on a micro time scale, or is it purely masking? I think with the data you have, that would be really interesting to study.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Let me just add a different comment to that, because I don't have an answer to the micro timescale, but one thing that we wanted to be sure of is we know that birds do change their song in noisy environments, as was just said, but Okay, if birds are making a different song in urban environments and in less urban environments, is that going to be an issue for us in detecting and classifying them? Because the phenomena are different. Luckily, the changes are actually quite minor, and that doesn't have an impact on our classification performance. So that was quite a lucky thing. But yeah, there is variation.